Okay, we know where you are.
Well, good afternoon. It is 12:01 p.m. on Friday, June 20th. I am Bend City Councilor Ariel Mendez and Chair of the Bend MPO Policy Board. We now convene today's board meeting. First item is call to order and introductions. If we could just go around the table and introduce yourself, that would be great, starting with Ken.
That'll be fun. Ken Schunkweiler, Interim Planning Manager in Region 4 ODOT.
Brad Tower with the City of Bend presenting the update on the Riverfront Street project.
Great.
I'm Nick Lelak, the Hughes County Administrator, and I'm serving as the alternate Commissioner Phil Chang.
I'm Dre Napoli, Senior Planner with the Bend MPO. Kelly Kennedy, Bend MPO staff.
Mike Riley, Bend City Councilor.
And Tyler Diekey, Bend MPO Manager.
And Tyler, do we have anyone online that you could introduce?
Yeah, I think Chuck Arnold, who is currently on our budget committee, is online, and I think he's our only guest at the moment.
Great. Well, thanks, everyone. Item 2 is hybrid meeting guidelines. Tyler?
All right, so the meeting is being streamed and recorded. And for those online, please use the raise hand function. Otherwise, that's all. Okay.
Item 3 is public comment. Do we have anyone who would like to make a public comment? Brad, you're probably going to save everything for your presentation.
Exactly.
Okay, seeing none, let's move on to item 4, approval of the May 16th, 2025 meeting minutes.
I move approval of the minutes.
Is there a second? Would you be willing to make a second?
Sure, I second it.
Thank you. Motion has been made by Councilor Riley and seconded by Mr. Schunkweiler. Schunkweiler, right?
Yes.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Any abstentions?
I will abstain. I did not attend the meeting, and I have not coordinated with Commissioner Chang on his review.
Okay, the motion passes 2-0 with 1 abstention. Item 5, our year-end promissory note. Tyler?
All right. Just a quick update or quick review for our new members who are here today. The MPO operates on a reimbursement basis. We receive reimbursements, we do our work, and submit reimbursement requests to ODOT for those funds. And so at the end of the year, we need to we utilize an overnight loan from the City of Bend to be able to close out our fiscal year budget. And so through that process, we typically sign a promissory note for that year-end loan. And that authorizes an overnight operating loan from the City of Bend with an amount not to exceed $200,000 financing before those funds are received. I believe the promissory note is up to 200,000, but I think we're expecting it to be the actual one to be closer to 50,000.
Possibly.
Yeah. So we're putting it at 200 just in case of some potential external reimbursement requests that we may receive between now and the end of the fiscal year. Any questions?
Okay, well, great. This is one of those weird artifacts that I think people have a lot of questions, maybe the first time they see it, and after looking into it, this works, it's functional, it would take a lot to change anything and probably not worthwhile. I think one question was about whether reserves could cover this in the future, but this is functional and it works. So if there's, unless there are any further questions, would someone like to make a motion?
I move to authorize the policy board chair to sign the promissory note to document the reimbursement practices of the City of Bend and Bend MPO and state law regarding year-to-year municipal budgets.
And I can second the motion.
Thank you. A motion has been made by Councilor Riley and seconded by Mr. Lilac. Is there any further discussion? Would all those in favor please say aye?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item 6, the Bend MPO Policy Board amended bylaws adoption. Tyler?
All right. And I think we have two new members or two, stand-in members today. If you have questions, please stop me because I was going to jump through discussion or the points that have been approved through prior discussions with the board are adding CET as a voting member to the board. That member will be the CET director, reducing the City of Bend members from 3 to 2, providing each member with a vote, because right now the way the bylaws are written, there are currently 3 City of Bend representatives, but combined they get a single vote. And so our board is, there's 3 total votes. Currently it'll move to a 5-vote system. Voting approval will require 3 of those 5 voting members to approve any action. Quorum requirements are that we have 3 of 5 voting members present. And then there were a lot of other smaller, less substantive changes that have been discussed at a series of meetings over the last year and a half with the board. Any questions on those? I mean, where we are right now with those changes?
Could you remind us what the timeline is for this? So if we go through these proposed changes, it looks like there were some comments from the city and the county, which are appreciated. If we make amendments or if we agree to approve these, what are the next steps? What's the timeline for adoption?
Well, I think it's a quite good question because with the comments that were received, most of them are pretty minor.
Mhm.
So I guess in my mind, depending on how that discussion goes, I think the board could vote to approve these bylaws today.
And then that would the 30-day period. Well, this is just for the bylaws, but this would also require an amendment to the IGA, right?
Correct. And when we're still, the IGA
Okay.
is still being, there's some review happening between.
Okay. And for the bylaws, the IGA has this 30-day agency review process, but the bylaws do not. Is that correct?
No, the way the bylaws are currently written is that any amendment process, that the parties to it have a 30-day review process. And so we initiated that after our last meeting in May. And the comments that are on these next couple of slides were what came out of that 30-day review process.
I see.
And so I sent it out to Nick Lilac, I sent it to Eric King, sent it to Omar Ahmed with ODOT, and also sent it to Bob Townsend at ODOT as a courtesy, given that they will be, or that CET will be a voting member in the future.
Okay.
So if we make further changes today, do we have to repeat the 30-day thing?
That's a good question. I mean, that's where I'm kind of like, some of the potential changes are fairly minor. And so our bylaws aren't clear on that in terms of whether we would need to, do another 30-day review period.
Well, it seems like the 30-day review period is an opportunity for comment and potential objection. And so we could just, if we approve these today with the minor changes, if no participating agency raises an objection, then we just have to wait for that 30-day period to elapse before it's in effect, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, do you want to proceed with this item?
Yeah. So I'll just walk through the comments that we received. And so we received a total of 6 comments from City of Bend staff and 1 from Deschutes County, one of the Deschutes County commissioners. The first one is related to alternates, which is in section J of the bylaws. Commissioner, Article 3, section J. In terms of appointing alternates to the policy board, there was language added where it says or appointed member. And can you look over your shoulder for just a minute, Counselor? And so it says, an appointed alternates will be appointed by their governing bodies or appointed member. And Commissioner DeBonne raised a question about that language. And I think it's, not having talked to him, I make an assumption that he had some concerns about that authority being pulled away from the county commission. And my recommendation would be that we could change the language in there to where it's a City of Bend alternates could be appointed by, keep the language as is for city, and then have a separate sentence for the county that just says county alternates will be appointed by the county commission.
This is a strange situation, because I think our practice has been, if an appointed member is unable to attend, there is an effort to find a replacement. Typically that has been a staff member, as is the case today. And without that discretion of the appointed member, would you say, Tyler, that in the example of Deschutes County, an alternate would have to be appointed by their governing body? So if the appointed member was not present, essentially the county would not be represented without action by the commission.
Well, I think what we've typically done in the past is at the start of, if we have, at the start of each almost every new or calendar year, which is how our operating system is set up, we reach out to city manager, county administrator, and others and ask that the alternates be designated at that point and that they step through their internal process. And we keep a log of that. And so I think as long as the county commission has identified their list of alternates,
I see.
we will have that on record. And then if, Commissioner Chang can't be here, then we would have that list that we could represent him in his absence. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I think that sounds satisfactory. Does anyone else have thoughts or questions about this item?
The only comment I have is that I circulated the draft bylaws to our board and road department director and others. And the only comment I received was from Commissioner DeBonne, and he just stated to me, or appointed member is the only item that I want to know more about. So I completely defer to you, Tyler. I didn't hear him say to remove it or concerns, but if I had, I bet I didn't speak to him more about that. I assumed I would learn more about that today. So I didn't come prepared to ask that this be removed, but perhaps you heard directly from him, and so I'll completely defer to you on your advice to the.
Well, the way these are written, it says that the governing body or the appointed member can appoint the alternates, right? So the county commission has the authority to do it. If they don't do it, it hasn't been done, then Phil can say, hey, I'm appointing Nick today. So that seems reasonable to me. It allows both options. So it's really up to the commission to formally do that. And if they don't, for some reason, we still have the ability to make sure we get an alternate to show up, because Phil can choose one. So I would say it's okay today if there hasn't been a specific request to change the language in a specific way.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think the practice has been, if there is a list of basically pre-appointed alternates, that's certainly workable. And, I guess the question would be, is having or appointed member so permissive that it would allow, it's hard to see how this would, because the alternate has to be an elected official or a staff person, although we don't specify from the participating agency. It's hard to imagine that this would be taken as, a concern about, appointing someone to participate who wouldn't somehow authorized. So I think I'm okay leaving it as is, as Councilor Riley suggested. Do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you. Maybe just for the meeting record, if the language is going to be retained as proposed rather than removing this, it's helpful for me to hear this and put it on the record that one of the things I can do is to work with the board as they appoint their MPO member annually is to also appoint those alternates so that we do have that pre-approved list. So the board feels like they have made their, they've approved the list of the member and the alternates so that they feel comfortable with the member appointing whomever may be on that list, rather than just have the member pick
Yeah,
somebody who's not
This
pre-approved.
is an area where the next item.
I mean, just while we're here in this area of the bylaws, I was surprised to, and it would probably just didn't catch this, but the paragraph immediately above this, if you're looking at the actual bylaws, is getting at this other major transportation providers. Shall be added to the policy. We got rid of that elsewhere and or in the TAC. I think there's a different section where we got rid of that language, but we retained it here. So I just was wondering why. Am I misunderstanding the difference between this location and the bylaws and the other spot? I ran out of time to really read it super carefully, but I think it's section 6.
Yeah.
Where we're deleting a whole paragraph about future transportation providers. 6B is deleted. But we still have this reference to them in this earlier section, which seems a little odd.
Yeah, I think the section that you're referring to, I think that could be deleted.
So this is paragraph I in.
Right, it's immediately
Article
before.
3.
Yeah, it's immediately before the paragraph we were just talking about.
Yeah, I don't have any objection to that.
As I understood it, the reason we took out this concept before is that these were written long ago, before we had CET, and things have really changed and we don't need this anymore. So it seems like we should get rid of it in both places.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the future, it may be that Central Oregon has more than one transit provider, and maybe that would provide an opportunity to revisit that, but I don't see any reason why we wouldn't remove it.
Okay. Is there agreement from,
So what?
is there agreement from our other members?
Any thoughts, Ken?
I don't, yeah, I think it's, as far as we're concerned, we don't necessarily have an opinion on the matter.
Okay. Nick? Yeah, I think it sounds like making it consistent with other changes that we're adopting. Next item.
Next up is same article, Article 3. It's under section N, officers. And adding, just clarifying or making a minor modification to the language there to say the policy board shall have the opportunity to provide input on the manager's annual evaluation, and the input may be provided in executive session. I reviewed the executive session, the public meeting laws, executive section language, and it talks about being able to, that's an option that's available. And so just put the wording in there to tie in with that.
I think that sounds good. Is there any questions or discussion on that item? This was really motivated by our dissatisfaction with the executive director.
Yes.
Completely kidding. No, I think it makes sense to provide an opportunity for the policy board to provide input on the executive director's performance. So I appreciate that one. Next item.
Article 4, 8, under meeting agendas, there was a question about providing a material after the 5-day deadline, the way it's written. The way we have it written today is that we say that materials in the agenda packet need to be provided to us 5 days in advance of the meeting. And then we will provide, if we receive information, particularly like public comment after that time, after we post the agenda, that we will still summarize that, but we won't, that'll be provided at the meeting. And there was a question from city staff about potentially just simply removing that language and not providing that information. I think for us as a small organization, keeping the language as is, that's something we can do. And my recommendation would be to not change that language.
Okay, any thoughts on this item? Okay.
And then same Article 4, Section H, another question about having, we list 5 days. It's in there twice in terms of sorry, I have to look over your shoulder again because I didn't print a copy. Providing the materials, no later than 5 days in advance, and then us posting the materials no later than 5 calendar days in advance. The suggestion was to change the first one to 6 calendar days to give us sufficient time to organize the materials to be posted in advance.
Yeah, if that sounds doable, I would defer to staff on that one. Okay.
The next question that was raised is under Article 8, formation of special committees. There was a question, Section E. And it's the TAC shall determine membership on a special committee appointed by the TAC. And the question was, everything above that in that article refers to policy board special committees. And so my recommendation, they felt it was out of place and didn't belong in that, under that article. And so my recommendation would be to, one, either delete that section or move it into our bylaws, our TAC bylaws document. I think either option would be fine.
Has the TAC ever formed a special committee?
No.
But they must have some authority to do it in the bylaws, in the TAC bylaws.
Yeah, I believe so.
I mean, my sense is if there was an issue that the technical advisory committee felt strong enough about forming a committee over that, I think the policy board would probably want to hear it and have input on that. So I would recommend removing paragraph E.
Yeah, it's fine.
Any thoughts? Okay.
And then the last comment is under Article 9 amendments, Section D. In there, we say the amended bylaws by a supermajority vote of members. The recommendation from city staff was to clarify what is a supermajority.
Yeah, I agree. That was my,
And
when I
so
read it, I had the same reaction.
And so the language is proposed, it's leave it supermajority of voters, and then a nuisance, a supermajority is defined as 4 out of 5 voting members.
Not 3.5, or if someone sort of feels like, oh, I could go either way. Okay, no, I think that sounds good.
That was it. Those were the only comments that we received from agency staff.
Okay, well, is there any other items that any policy board members would like to raise at this point, or would someone be willing to make a motion?
I move adoption of the proposed Bend MPO policy board bylaw amendments as presented today with today's amendments.
Motion has been made by Councilor Riley. Is there a second?
Second.
The motion has been seconded by Mr. Schunkweiler. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the motion passes unanimously. Thanks, everyone. Moving on to item 7, State Highway Fund Program Project Application Criteria Update. Andrea.
Yes, Tyler, you can go to the next slide. So We're going to be starting our third call for projects using a portion of our SHF funds. The call for projects begins in September. This is a competitive, criteria-based process that we do about every 2 to 3 years. But we do need to revisit the criteria and scoring that was used for the last call for projects. So that's what we'll be doing today, and reviewing the TAC had this topic at their last meeting. So they have made a recommendation to the policy board on what edits they think are appropriate. So I'll go ahead and review that with you. And then looking for a final decision on the criteria, language, and scoring for this upcoming call for projects. So a little background here. Our first project application process, we did that in 2020. And the criteria then was based on our Metropolitan Transportation Plan goals. They were slightly revised. The criteria was slightly revised for the 2022 call for projects, really minor language changes, and then adding in the use of our equity mapping tool where appropriate for the equity criterion. And how the criteria scoring is applied. Basically, what we do is once we get all the applications in and that call for project is closed, staff will draft the initial scoring based on the information that the applicant provides on how well that supports the criteria. And then the TAC finalizes the scoring through consensus, and they use that to inform their recommendation, funding recommendation to the policy board. The policy board in turn looks at the TAC recommendation and scoring, and then uses that to inform their final funding decision. Any questions on the background? Okay, so next slide. So I realize this is pretty busy, but so this is the 2022 criteria and scoring with TAC edits highlighted. So we can go through, I'll kind of go through an overview of the TAC edits. So they didn't suggest any changes to the safety criterion, but they did suggest edits to the second one, and that would be to change it to read project increases system capacity, quality, and or connectivity for delete multiple users and drivers, and have it simply read cyclists, pedestrian, transit users, and add in those who do not drive, and then up the points on that one. And the reasoning behind that is that they wanted to encourage benefits to multimodal and vulnerable users. And then the third criterion, project increases system efficiency, add in and or reliability without increasing lane capacity or at a lower cost, and or system-wide benefit. And that was simply for more clarification.
So I don't understand what that means. It's not clear to me. As a newbie, like, so is it saying increase system efficiency and or reliability without increasing lane capacity? But what's the lower cost?
So the lower cost would be associated if it was like a ITS, like say like a signal improvement or something technology related, where you're not necessarily doing like a capital improvement.
Yeah.
But so then do these projects come with a comparison of like, we could get the same efficiency by doing this capital improvement, or we can get the same efficiency by investing in this technology? I just like,
Yeah, not necessarily.
who's evaluating the lower cost? Where's that showing up? And if it's not actually even part of the applications, why is it even here? Because it just seems odd to me. And then I don't understand without increasing system-wide benefit. I don't understand what this means.
And or system-wide benefit. So that would be is if it was like a project that was system-wide, like not just one location, but at multiple locations.
Well, I think,
But you're saying that that would be beneficial and it would contribute it to the likelihood of getting a higher score in this category if it had system-wide. But
Correct.
it's phrased in a way that suggests without it have, I don't know, I just, when I read it, it's confusing to me. So if we're actually saying we're gonna give you more points if it has a system-wide benefit, we need to say that more explicitly.
I think, so I think what maybe, I see what you're saying, and if in parentheses there, it started with system-wide benefit, comma, and or without increasing lane capacity or at lower cost, close parentheses. Does that address that concern? So in other words, what does system efficiency mean? Well, it means it has a system-wide benefit and it achieves that without increasing lane capacity or at a lower cost.
I mean, I get the lane capacity part, but again, at the lower cost part, like, are you asking people to compare it cost-wise to some other alternative that might produce a similar result as part of the application? Because otherwise, how does anybody know that when they're evaluating the project, that it's actually cheaper? We're just trusting the applicant to tell us that.
Right.
That's okay.
You're right. It's based on, the scoring is based on whatever information the applicant provides.
Uh-huh.
So if they were to provide that, then you would use that towards the scoring. And we do ask for, like in the application, when they, the description of how they're saying that they are supporting this criteria, if they do have, instead of, data, we do ask for that.
So, Councilor Riley, do you want to clarify the system-wide benefit? Or, I mean, I think this doesn't obligate an applicant to show lower cost. I think it provides an option for them to do that if they wanted to. So if that information is not available, it means that they could still score in this category by demonstrating some other measure of system efficiency. So it could still be focused on not improving efficiency or reliability without adding lane capacity, or it could also be some, demonstrate that it has a system-wide effect. And I think this is the intention there is we have seen some projects that have a more localized effect. The benefit is to a particular, I think a particular locality that maybe doesn't quite have as strong a system-wide benefit. So this was just an effort to, I think, incorporate that concept.
I mean, I might be more likely to say project increases system efficiency and or reliability without increasing lane capacity, period. And then have a different sentence that gets at these other things about, please explain how, project demonstrates system-wide benefit. Project demonstrates it is a more cost-efficient approach to another alternative or something. I'm just trying to make it clear. Having been working through lots of grant application processes where the criteria aren't clear, it's very frustrating as an applicant when then you're then told later, you didn't get it for these reasons. And you're like, well, but you didn't really tell me to do that. So it's like the insiders know what they're looking for, but the outsiders don't. So how do we make it clear for both sides of the process?
So underneath each criterion, there's a little description where we say, if you have data to provide, and we could add in a sentence that expands more on this.
Right. So maybe you're already doing something like what I'm asking and I'm not seeing that, but I still think it could be.
But we could certainly, we're not doing the call for projects till later this summer, so we could pass that language on to you for your review.
I mean, I think the kind of examples of system system-wide benefit are, for example, if we're talking about a sidewalk infill project and the sidewalk that it is proposed for is not part of the city's sidewalk plan or an identified key route or could serve a cul-de-sac or something like that. That would probably score lower, and I think appropriately so, than a sidewalk that was identified as a barrier to it reaching some either key amenity or part of safe routes to schools or those are the kinds of.
Right, so, yeah, so I mean, and you're being clear about what your main parts of the criteria. If the cost comparison is something else you want to see, you can either put it in here, you can put it in the notes. If your project is a cheaper alternative than something else, please show data to support that compares the options or something. I just don't think it's clear, but I'll stop now. Don't beat this to death.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. So would you suggest just removing the cost?
I would suggest removing the cost and putting in whatever this explanatory statement that Andrea is talking about, and then change the language, say project increases system efficiency and or reliability without increasing lane capacity, comma, and demonstrates system-wide benefit. Because, and you're saying like projects that do all these things are going to get higher scores in my mind.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I could do that.
Andrea, were you able to capture that?
Got it.
Okay.
All right, then moving to number 4. So the TAC had suggested to delete this one simply because they felt that they captured it now in number 2. The 5th one, no changes to the vehicle miles traveled criterion. Same with our equity related criterion. No changes to that one. And then also keeping number 7, which is about cost sharing or including other investments or from other funding sources. And then 8 and 9, they're suggesting to delete that. And that was originally a staff suggestion based on the fact that over these last 2 call for projects, those 2 just really weren't very helpful. And they agreed with that.
And I think they fit with the overall goal of trying to streamline the application process and make it simpler, which I think has some
Define it.
virtues.
Right.
So I'm supportive of all those. I'm gonna go back up though in the packet. When the background section, there's a paragraph or there's a sentence that's highlighted in bold that says the resulting criteria scoring for each project application is simply a tool to assist in funding recommendations and decisions, as there can be other factors to consider, readiness, available of other funding sources. So where do we learn about that? Like why isn't that either in here, or is there a place where applicants are asked to speak directly to project readiness and directly to the, how they're funding the project and show like this is how much is secured? Because again, going back to this idea about being transparent, like, and I'm not even 100% sure who's applying. It's all city people mostly, but just being clear up front, like these are things we want to hear information about. They're not just talked about in a little side group, so that everybody has a chance to address them.
Right. So
Demonstrate.
yeah, with the we do have a table where they add in other funding sources in the application. But when it comes to and then there's also an additional space for, is there other information, that you'd like to share about this project?
Mm-hmm.
And the applicants do come in and give presentations, and that's an opportunity for the board to ask additional questions. Mm-hmm. But the reason why that language is in there is because are there other things out, like the criteria can't cover absolutely everything for reasons. And so that's
I understand, but what this suggests to me is that readiness available under other funding sources has been important in making decisions in the past. So that's the case. It will likely be so in the future. So let's be explicit and just say, tell us about project readiness. Do you have the permits? Do you have, we're running into this with a completely different topic at the city, and there's concerns about it, comparing projects. So just being explicit, tell it, define readiness in some way, and then show us a budget that says this is what it costs, this is where the money's coming from, and how much of it's secured.
Yeah.
It's a very common practice.
Yeah, we have that part covered, but we can certainly add in a readiness.
Yeah, and I realize it's, maybe it's different.
Not necessarily maybe in the criteria, but in the application.
But it's just explicit in the application and it's shared directly with whoever's reviewing. Here's readiness information on this project. Here's a summary of it, and here's the budget. They've got all the money except ours, so we're like the last piece. Or these guys have 5 other sources of money they have to get. It's going to be a year and a half.
Yeah.
So we're just asking them to describe project readiness, but not necessarily include it
As a school.
criterion.
Yeah. Okay.
Correct.
And it's directly like a place they have to do this information.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. We do see some projects not move forward because they're not considered sufficiently ready.
Yeah.
And that, even if that's not reflected in the criteria, it's certainly an important factor, so important to include. And Mike, did
And I
you?
realize I've never been through this, so I'm just coming at this completely as an outsider. I'm just,
No, I think that's a
the
good
things I
suggestion.
see.
I think it's
have gone
helpful,
through
yeah.
Grant processes before.
Availability of underfunding sources, do you feel like item 7 in the criteria sufficiently covers that?
Yeah, and what we do have, there is more to that in the application packet.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think for me, it sort of relates almost to readiness. Like, okay, I know that you've applied and that money might be available. Like, well, where are you in the process? Like, is it secured or not? And how long is it going to take? 80% is unsecured. Like, what's the schedule? Well, maybe that's going to be ripe in a year. It's not ready now. It's
Right.
readiness.
Okay. Any other comments for the slide? Oh, yeah, of course.
Well, just big picture, and I'm sorry that I didn't coordinate with Commissioner Chang on these, because I just don't have a sense of how big of a change is it, for example, in number 2 to remove drivers. I don't know. I don't know. Are these significant policy changes? And I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, because this is just my not being familiar with this whole process and application and
Right.
I can speak to that a little bit.
Sure.
I think this does a better job of reflecting in some ways what past history has been. And for me individually, anyway, one of the things that stands out is when we approved our Metropolitan Transportation System Plan, not only were the aggregate number of vehicle miles traveled increasing, but the per capita VMTs were also increasing. And so I think this reflects, in a way, the effort to try to grapple with that, even in a small way, because this is not a massively funded grant program, but to try to identify projects that would kind of, tip the balance in the other direction to a certain extent. And I think that's in line with the kind of projects that this organization has funded, at least in the last couple of years. And so in that sense, it's making that more explicit.
Okay.
Andrea, did you
Yeah,
want-
no, I mean, I agree with you. Because we don't have a lot, it's not a well-funded, we don't have a lot of money for these projects, and they generally
Okay.
all are smaller bike pedestrian.
Okay, that's my bad.
Yeah.
What's the total amount for
Each
cycle?
year for the coming up 28, 29, and 30 is about 350,000 a year.
Very small, right? So it's not, your ability to, and those dollars are completely discretionary for us at the
Yes.
MPO, right? There are
Correct.
no rules, right?
No, I mean, there's rules around them being state highway funds as far as they need to be projects within the right of way.
In the right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, just 2 other quick
Yeah.
questions. One is, and just to clarify, these criterion, they are based off of the the TSP, the BMPO, Metropolitan Transportation Plan goals. So that's what these are directly.
From our 2019 plan.
Okay.
So we did adopt our plan update in 2020. And the goals had changed somewhat, but yes.
Okay, and the key is just that, I mean, just coming in and feeling comfortable with voting for this, that they're consistent with the goals. You feel like
Correct,
the staff
yes.
feels like they're consistent. These clearly implement
Yeah.
the goals in the plan. Okay, and then the second question was not under really being aware, and I didn't see any summary of the TAC, which is fine, but they recommended these. Were there any disagreements among TAC members on the final recommendation, or were they unanimously forwarded to the policy?
I mean, there was
board
definitely
for-
some discussion that filled the meeting.
Sure.
But in the end, I don't think anyone was against any one change. It was all consensus.
That's, okay, that was my last question. Great,
Yeah.
thank you.
And safety and meeting the needs of sort of more vulnerable users or non-drivers is a big part, is a priority in the system, in the goals and the plan.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, if there's no other comment on this, Tyler, you can scroll through a couple. So this, I had just broken these down individually, but we don't need to go through that. So then the next item is looking at minor funding adjustments for awards that have been made. And if the board would like to allow the MPO manager to make minor adjustments to awards without having to bring that topic back to the board if it's within a certain, under a certain threshold. So for example, if it's at or below 10% of the award or $25,000, you know, whichever is less, or if those numbers should be revised. And if this is something that the board would like to do.
Okay,
Specifically for this
Yeah.
SHF program.
The policy board approves the projects in the end, right?
The policy board approves the projects, say, you know, so many years down, because we're looking out. So by the time that the projects are actually provided the funding, sometimes they might need
Right.
a little less or a little more. Yeah. Not a little less.
So a related question to that
Yeah.
is sometimes if an applicant completes a project and has funding left over, do we expect those funds to be returned?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and we've gotten returned funds in the past, and we have a policy around that on how the board looks to reallocate those.
Okay. Any other comments on the idea of allowing the MPO manager to approve changes, amendments to these awards by 10% or $25,000, whichever is less? I think it sounds like it makes sense.
Yep, I agree.
We have a high degree of confidence and trust in our manager. Okay, so we have some edits to item 3 from Councilor Riley, which I think makes sense. Any other comments or questions on the State Highway Fund grant program?
I'll just say I was kind of debated, having failed to, my fault for coordinating with Commissioner Chang on his position and vote on this. I was kind of between, do I abstain, do I support it? But given that I have the confidence that it is implementing the adopted plan, the adopted goals in the plan, and given the consensus recommendation from the TAC, and I always have great confidence in those discussions and then ultimate recommendations, I'm comfortable voting to support it.
Okay, so we have 2 motions that we're being asked to review. Would someone like to make a motion?
I move to approve the project application criteria and scoring for the 2025 call for projects as presented and amended.
And I will second the motion.
Okay, a motion has been made by Councilor Riley and seconded by Mr. Lilac. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Is there a second motion?
Is there a second motion? Oh, I see a second. I move to authorize the Bend MPO manager to adjust state highway fund awards by up to 10% or $25,000, whichever is less, as needed.
I'll second that.
Okay, a motion has been made by Counselor Riley and seconded by Mr. Schunkweiler. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, thanks, everyone. We are on to item number 8, which is Riverfront Street Design Project Update. And we have a special guest today, Brad Tower.
Yeah.
Brad.
And is it more appropriate, so I can see folks that present from the back here or go up front? Is that inappropriate to stand over there? Or
Yeah, if you
Totally
want to move.
Yeah,
just
whatever.
weird presenting from the back, so I'm not trying to like over formalize it, but okay.
Andrea, I want to just get, like, can you put you on the spot? Can you give like a teeny bit of background about the funding for this?
Oh, right. So just as we were discussing when funding is returned. So there was a project that went through our, well, at that time it was called STBG program, was awarded funding, ended up using other funding for it, returned the funds, and the board had awarded those dollars to the Riverfront Street. So that is part of the Deschutes River Trail from Miller's Landing to Galveston.
Yeah, and I'll go through, because I figured everyone in the meeting's not totally up to date, so
Oh,
I'll here's a
okay.
quick crash course as far as what's going on.
Gotcha.
But any additional?
Yeah, I mean, and then they had awarded, so essentially, which I'm sure you'll talk about, the street is beyond repair. So looking at using those dollars to make that connection, continue the Deschutes River Trail.
So yeah, Brad Tower with the City of Bend, here to present an update on Riverfront Street. And as I just mentioned, I'm not sure if everyone's up to speed with the project, so I'll give a very quick crash course to get us all up to speed and then go into a little more detail about where we're at currently. So Riverfront Street, it's a residential street that runs parallel to the Deschutes River between Miller's Landing to the south and Henry Park to the north, which is just adjacent to Galveston Avenue. Riverfront Street's considered one of the last remaining gaps in the Deschutes River Trail. And in addition to that, as was just mentioned, Riverfront Street itself, the pavement's failing, there's non-compliant sidewalk, there's no storm pre-treatment. So in general, it's long overdue for a facelift. So this leads into, next slide, please, where we established our project here. So kicking off with our project goals, there's other things that we're looking to address, but these are the overarching main stated goals of the project. So complete the missing segment of the Deschutes River Trail. That's the large driver of the project, trail connectivity project. But while addressing that, we're looking to address the pavement conditions, upgrade the stormwater system to include pre-treatment, and improve the transitions at Miller's Landing Park and Gilchrist Avenue. Now that trail connection is an area of interest for Bend Parks and Rec. So in 2023, Bend Parks and Rec and the City of Bend formed an intergovernmental agreement where we agreed to split the design costs 50-50. The City of Bend is leading the project. We're managing the project, but Bend Parks and Rec is providing not only financial assistance, but also technical assistance as well. So things like public meetings, design reviews and such. And the main thing they want to see out of this is a minimum 8-foot wide accessible path to make that trail connection. But we're aiming to achieve a 10-foot shared use path. Project details. So we have a design consultant, Harper Huff, Peterson Regelis, mouthful there, HHPR. They're a design consultant. Our contract is in the amount of $683,000. Again, 50-50. Bend Parks is paying for half. The other half is through the City of Bend, which goes to why it ties in here with the MPO. Our portion of the funding was provided via a grant through the MPO, which we're very grateful for. And then there was a remaining match that we needed to make. So roughly $20,000 from our street preservation fund ultimately combines with the MPO grant to get us to that halfway or the 50-50 mark for that contract. Our design consultant kind of going into the project timeline there. Last spring, they surveyed the whole site to get all the information necessary for us to start coming up with a design for Riverfront Street. So from that point on through roughly the end of last year, we went into what's called our alternatives analysis phase, where we looked at various design options for Riverfront Street that would satisfy our project goals. And then now we're up to where we're at now, which is in the design phase, which we're looking to work through this year. Real quick before, next slide, please, before getting into where we're at now, just a quick background on the public meetings ultimately drove where we got to where we're at now. So the general feedback we got from the public, or that we get from the public, is that they want to get involved with projects much earlier. A lot of times they come to them at like the 60% mark and they feel like they didn't have a chance to provide input. So with this project, we wanted to get everyone's input before we even kick-started the design alternatives analysis phase. So the first public meeting, we just presented to the public what the project is, the goals, the constraints, and then we opened it up to kind of a workshop. So that image there on the right is just a little snippet of a big strip map that we had of Riverfront Street. Had a very, almost like the table here, just an open discussion with the public, encourage them to provide notes on sticky notes, put it on the along Riverfront Street where applicable. And we had a similar exercise, not in person, but online, with a survey, again, trying to get everyone's feedback of what's working well, what's not working well on Riverfront Street, what would they like to see. I don't have the time in this presentation here to necessarily go through every point there, but on the left, that kind of goes through a lot of the themes that we found in terms of what people would like to see on Riverfront Street. We took all this information and said, okay, now that we have everyone's input in advance of the project, how can we incorporate this into our design alternatives? So the second public meeting, the next slide here, this is where we presented 2 design concepts. We were weighing how many design concepts made sense. Really, we kept coming down to the real decision point was kind of a binary decision. Is this going to be a one-way or a two-way street? And what's the project footprint going to look like? And those two are very closely related to one another. So the two-way option, you have a greater project footprint than exists today, but it maintains the existing traffic pattern, so two-way travel. Whereas the one-way is a smaller footprint than the two-way option, but it's northbound only traffic. So people can't turn off with this design proposal, couldn't turn off at Galveston onto Riverfront. In order to access Riverfront, they would need to turn onto Riverside to access Riverfront. What we found, just looking at the 2 options, one way would likely do a much better job of preserving existing landscaping, which is a high area of importance to the community that we found. Again, I won't go through every bullet point on the right, but we were confident that both designs, from the previous slide of all the input that we had from the public, we're confident that both designs could satisfy the vast majority of what they were interested in. So again, once we presented to the public 2 design alternatives similar to the first public meeting, we had a couple tables set out, 2 strip maps, and just basically engaged with everyone, had a really good conversation about what they're seeing, concerns, pros and cons. And then similar to the first public meeting, we opened up an online survey as well, which was open for a few weeks, again, to collect everyone's feedback as far as which design alternative that they preferred. Long story short, it looked like roughly 85% of respondents were leaning towards the one-way option. So we were very comfortable knowing that, okay, it's not 100%, but I don't think you're ever going to get 100% with these types of projects, but there was a strong support for that design. So that got us to where we're at today, which is, okay, we're going to proceed with the one-way design. Next slide here. So yeah, the design progress. Now that's more or less the point of why I'm here today. We go to the next slide. This is just to quickly get our bearings on the project. So this is the existing condition looking northbound. So this is as if you're looking like towards Drake Park, working left to right in the screen. There's an existing 4-foot sidewalk that's being generous. A lot of areas are much less than that. And then working to the right, you have 8 feet of parking on the west side of the street, 16 feet for drive aisle, which allows for two-way travel. In the next slide, you'll see that 4-foot sidewalk, it now becomes a 10-foot wide multi-use path. And so everything kind of gets shifted to the east there. But the 16-foot drive aisle now becomes a 12-foot one-way drive aisle. And we're still able to maintain an 8-foot parking space, but now it's on the east side of the road. We go to the next slide. This is just, I didn't have the time in this presentation nor the ability to fit the whole strip map of Riverfront Street, but I just wanted to kind of give one example and kind of walk through what we're looking at and then just take a back step and give a feel for where the project's at as a whole. So if you start on the right side of the image here, kind of towards the top, you'll see the label says parking. So this is, again, if you're facing from right to left, picturing in mind that last cross-section we were looking at, this is an example of that cross-section itself. So you've got the parking on the east side or on the top side of the image there. You've got the one-way drive aisle heading northbound. And then just beneath that, you've got your 10-foot shared use path. And you can see that existing aerial imagery underneath where the 4-foot sidewalk is. So that's definitely a substantial improvement as far as that facility is concerned. And then another bit of input we got from the community was large interest in improving the crossing at Galveston. Galveston/Tumalo, so it says Tumalo on there. So that achieves really two things. So one, having a raised crossing increases the visibility for all users looking across the street. So safety is kind of paramount there. And then it also provides an element of traffic calming along Galveston. So there's a separate effort that I'm aware of where Galveston's going to get some facelift of its own. And currently the latest I've heard is they're proposing to have a raised crossing at 12th Street and an additional one further to the west. So these raised crossings are kind of to establish to motorists that, hey, you're entering into more of a pedestrian friendly area. A lot of people are biking. So Riverfront kind of coordinates directly with that. And I'll just zoom out and broadly just kind of give an update with the project as it is. Like I said, I can't necessarily go through every element of each individual element of Riverfront Street at the moment, but we're extremely encouraged by what we're seeing. We're roughly at the 30% mark. I was hoping to have a 30% design submittal by now. We're very close to that. I would say the biggest things that we're encouraged to see is it looks like we're going to be able to maintain a 10-foot shared use path throughout the entirety of the street. So we're really encouraged to see that. With the one-way design, it looks like we're going to be able to maintain the vast majority of the existing landscaping. So we really think, if you just picture walking down Riverfront Street, it really does have that quaint feel. We're looking to maintain that. So we're really encouraged to see that. We think with the one-way design, it'll achieve the desired reduce cut-through traffic, increase the safety of bicyclists and pedestrians. The list kind of goes on. I think there's a lot of positive things happening. The one thing that's holding us up at the moment, which is why we're not formally at the 30% design submittal yet, is the one of the primary project goals is to treat stormwater, and this is proving to be a much bigger challenge than I anticipated. So we're a little spoiled in Bend. Most of our projects, you can just install a sedimentation manhole as well as a dry well, and just let kind of water filter down through the soil and filter it naturally. We can't do that along Riverfront Street because being so close to the river, there's a very high groundwater table. So one of the solutions we're looking at is a mechanical solution with what are called contact filters. There's other brands, but contact is what we're looking at right now. But if you look at the vertical drop between where the catch basins are and where the outfalls are in the river, there's just such little drop there that it's very challenging for us to conceive how to, in between that, fit these filters for the water to filter through in order to achieve that filtration needed. So for the sake of time, I won't go necessarily into more details on that, but that's the overarching challenge that we're trying to work through right now is the stormwater treatment. Once the design consultant submits the 30%, which is imminent, we're confident here in the next few weeks we'll hit that formal 30% mark. That kickstarts two things. So one, that's the formal checkpoint where we can then engage with the franchise utilities for any coordination needed there. And then at the 30% mark, that's when we start our city formal process, our iterative process of 30, 60, 90, 100% design submittals. And we anticipate around the 90 to 100% mark. We don't have construction funding identified for this project yet. Around the 90 to 100% mark is when we'll really aggressively go look for grant funding. We find that it's easier to be awarded grants if there's a real conceivable project that has a basically shovel-ready design versus just a concept. So yeah, I think for the sake of time, we've got 5 minutes here. Thank you. Right. Kind of a quick crash course, and I spoke very quickly. Generally speaking, I think we're super encouraged by what the community is expecting of this project and what we're able to deliver. Really, the main sticking point that we're finding is just the stormwater treatment. And at this juncture, I don't have like the direct solution ready that we've found, but that's really the crux of what we're working through. But with that, are there any, I guess the next slide is what comes next. I kind of jumped into that, but are there any questions related to the project?
Is that mechanical? Is that like basically saying some kind of pressure has got to be added to?
It's similar to, so I know Newport, they used a lot of, those facilities off to the side of the road. In a few instances, they needed to use, I don't know if necessarily pressure needs to be added, but you just need vertical drop.
Right.
Because it's almost simulating what's happening when what we do with a dry well, right? When you just insert water into the ground, so it's kind of simulating that. But the crux of the issue is you need that vertical ability for water to flow through. So our consultant has a meeting with the manufacturer, or at least the company that produces those, just to get a better understanding. Because you also don't want like riverfront, or excuse me, the river itself, based on storms, can rise and fall, and that can send surges back up into the stormwater facilities that you have. And so it's definitely proving to be an even bigger challenge than we thought. So there's a few ideas we're considering, and there's also like the worst case scenario as far as like if you can't meet those requirements, the permit requirements provide other avenues as far as how to navigate that. So it's not like we will have no solution. It's just having an easy, ready to go solution is not available. Yeah.
And is there any kind of like a class 5? I think it's 5 is the least certain cost estimate, right? Or
For construction?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I hate to throw numbers out too early.
Yeah.
I don't want to necessarily be constrained, but I think we're looking at the single digit millions. I would hope it's 5 or less, but again,
What's that number again, Brad?
Pardon?
I didn't hear it. I didn't catch it. What was the number you threw out?
I'm hoping it's in the single digit in the millions in terms of construction, but I don't, like I said, I don't want to class 5 is one of those where it could double or half. So very gray at this point. And I think a lot of it will depend on, again, what type of solutions that we come up with the storm and
water.
such. So you take that number with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Yeah, great presentation. I was curious, and I've always wondered this with city facilities. So with options to treat offsite or essentially get credits, do you all essentially go down those paths, or is that the last resort that you were describing?
That's kind of what I was just referring to. I met with our stormwater team, and we're going through the different possibilities we could consider, and they said, really, this is like if you've demonstrated that you've attempted many different ways to solve the problem, you still just can't do it, there is that offsite option. And so to just quickly summarize that for the group, what that would be is, let's say this gray rectangle is the area of our project of Riverfront Street. And so this is the amount of water that we're looking to treat as part of the project scope. If we can't treat this area of water due to the limitations I just outlined, we could find somewhere else in town where we find that same, so your net improvement to the overall system, you're still treating that same volume of water, but it may not be at Riverfront Street. Again, that's not something we're going to quickly try to jump to, but that's kind of to your point, in our back pocket as worst case scenario.
2 questions. One is, have you considered some kind of permeable surface solution for stormwater? And then the second one is there the opportunity, given that funding has not yet been identified, could we peel off certain elements and do them in a quick build style? For example, some kind of chicane or bulb out that could be temporary. Just, we see other cities do this with planter boxes and things like that, but would affect the traffic flow and achieve some of the same effects of what we're talking about without a big investment. And the raised crossing strikes me as something that we might also consider kind of peeling off and trying to find an additional funding source for. Are those options that you're also considering?
Yeah, I'll start with the first question. Sorry, it's already escaping.
Permeable surface.
Yeah. So that hadn't been our first focus. It is, when you talk to the stormwater crew, that's a possibility that we can consider. The reason why that wasn't our first option that we're looking at is just coordinating with Bend Parks. They have a lot of experience with their shared use paths of using permeable surfaces. And in recent years, they've really veered away from that. They found that it requires a lot more maintenance than they would like. So it's not just kind of like a set it, forget it, that always functions. It's permeable when it's new, and then over time, it is a maintenance. I don't want to call it necessarily a burden, but it requires maintenance. So it's not out of the realm. It's certainly a possibility that we'll look into, but it hasn't been something we've put our primary focus on yet. But it is one of those options in our back pocket. And then to your other question, I think it's Tyler, you provided kind of a heads up on some of these. I know this has been a discussion for the riverfront project, and I would kind of split it into two ideas. So one is, I don't view the project in itself, as we've presented here, necessarily capable of being broken up into separate phases. If you go back to originally, Bend Parks and Rec looked at putting in a shared use path, I think around like 2017. And what they found was, and this is what we're finding here, you really can't isolate an individual that, like, once you put that path in, there's all these ripple effects because you're dealing with an existing situation with underground utilities and whatnot. I'm trying to just kind of speed through the details here, but essentially just by doing one piece, it really triggers all these other things that need to get done. Otherwise, you're gonna have to go back and like tear up something that you did. So I don't necessarily think this project could be viewed as it's kind of an all or nothing in terms of the final design we're going for. But I don't think that prohibits us from doing some sort of, as you're alluding to, like a quick build option. We don't have the scope with our design consultant nor funding to do that. But if we as a city allocated some dollars to do something like that, I definitely think we could, for example, like maybe make it a one-way street without formally ripping up the asphalt and changing things in that regard. So I think there's some flexibility in that regard. But in terms of, this project really kind of, to circle back, what is this project? It's largely a trail connectivity project, and it just triggers all these other things that we can improve in the interim to achieve that trail essence of the project with the quick build. I don't know if that's going to be the easiest thing to do, but in terms of maybe some of the traffic pattern changes that we're looking at, or maybe adding some elements of traffic calming, like narrowing the street with some quick build options, I do think that's definitely on the table. It would just need to be, I'd almost view it as like a separate parallel project. They're obviously related, but it's not something scoped with their current consultant, nor do we have the construction dollars for it. But I don't see anything stopping us from trying something like that.
Very good. Well, thank you, Brad. I think individually, I would love to see as much of it as we could, just minimal change, change the traffic pattern. I feel like that would be an improvement over the existing conditions where people they use the street anyway because the sidewalk is pretty rough. So just thinking about something quick, given that it's been almost a decade since the inception of this project, if there was something that we could do on a quick timeline, I think I would be supportive of breaking that out into a different phase. Any other questions or comments?
Just thank you, a comment. I have run this section of road over 200 days a year for 17 years. This is my path. I know it. I can see I've seen it year round. I've seen the whole street as a pedestrian corridor, bicycle corridor. The construction traffic has been, I think I've seen almost every house have some of change. So I do think about the construction traffic, and hopefully, as it can accommodate that in addition to the visitors, in addition to all the different users. So it's very exciting. This is the first time really learning about it, just in terms of preparing for this meeting. So I was looking forward to this agenda item. It's great to see that something will happen, and I really rely on, and I appreciate the minimal changes, and I also really rely on what the neighbors, the people that live along there think, and I really appreciate your engaging them to the extent that the city have, because they know what Quaint is going to be. They know what the improvements that are necessary. That sidewalk is so rough. It's hit and miss all over the place. The road it's just everything going on there. It's great, and I really trust that the residents are trying to figure out a way to accomplish everything that we need to accomplish with the trail connectivity, along with preserving and maintaining the quaintness of that part of town. It's near and dear to me. So
likewise, it's a super great area, right? Just the Schuster Trail is a great facility, and Riverfront, I think, is one of those that it is a quaint little residential street, so we want to maintain as best we can the overall feel that it has. So.
Thank you for that update, Brad.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, thanks.
No action for this item. So let's move on to item 9. We are about 5 minutes behind, but I think we'll go for community member appointments for Bend MPO committees. So Omar Ahmed and I met, I want to say it was 2 weeks ago, to consider the applications for our vacancies to the Budget Committee and the Technical Advisory Committee. We had 2 vacancies on the Budget Committee and 1 vacancy on the Technical Advisory Committee. And just as a reminder, the Technical Advisory Committee is fairly large and has a number of representatives from really all different parts of Central Oregon. We have 2 community members on the Technical Advisory Committee. I forget how many members we have in total, something like 15.
Like, what, 10?
12 voting plus some other.
Yeah, 12 voting plus several ex officio members.
Okay, so it's a fairly large advisory committee representing a diversity of expertise and constituents. And we have 2 community members. We received a number of very strong applications. One applicant was, I think, mistaken in applying, just apparently had intended to apply for a different committee. And we did reach a recommendation, which was, let's see, I'm just going to the, I think we struggled with this, which is good because you want strong applicants and you want the decision to be hard. And in this case, I think we did have a hard decision. The recommendations were to reappoint Greg Bryant to our Budget Committee and appoint a new applicant to both the Budget Committee and the Technical Advisory Committee. And the new applicant is Sydney Forbes. Sydney's application was particularly strong and detailed, and I think evidenced a perspective that we haven't necessarily seen in the past. I think Sydney demonstrated interest in a lot of the transportation issues that are at the core of what this body looks at. And so after discussing these applications, those were the 2 applicants that we recommended. I do want to stress that we appreciated everybody's interest. And in particular, I wanted to call out and thank Chuck Arnold for his service. I think Chuck's input has been invaluable, and this is not intended to say that we wouldn't or weren't interested in appointing Chuck, but with limited spots, this was the decision that we reached, and it was a hard decision. So I do hope that Chuck will remain engaged, and just don't want him to think that this was any kind of reflection of dissatisfaction or anything like that. So with that, does anybody have any questions about that process or where we might go in the future?
Maybe my only question, because I do see Chuck's online, I'm not looking to any response from him.
Yeah.
Did he apply as a Bend MPO resident or as a representative of the city of Redmond, or both, or?
I believe that Chuck is a Bend MPO resident.
Yes, yeah, I do. I'm aware of that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think, I don't want to say the wrong information, but I think all of the applicants that we recommended here were MPO residents, and
Yes,
remember
if
if
you
one
don't
was
mind.
not.
Yeah, so in this case, the positions are specifically for residents. It doesn't mean that if they worked for an entity that's also on our TAC, for instance,
Right.
they couldn't apply, but it would be in the resident point of view, basically, in the meetings.
I was just curious. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I think it was really exciting to get so many high quality applications, and it's not always, but sometimes it can be a challenge to find the kind of viewpoints and expertise that we think would be really helpful. But in this case, I think we're pretty well positioned. So unless there are further questions, would someone like to move to make these appointments? And you have on the screen, oh yeah, you have it, okay.
I move to appoint
If you look at the
Greg-
screen there.
Oh, it's up there. Greg Bryant, thank you. And Sydney Forbes to the Budget Committee and Sydney Forbes to the Technical Advisory Committee to serve the terms as presented.
Motion has been made by Counselor Riley. Is there a second?
I can second. Okay.
Motion has been seconded by Mr. Schonkweiler. Any further discussion?
I'll just say I'm pleased to support the motion, trusting the review process and the difficult decision you had to make.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Okay, item number 10 is a letter of support for the City of Bend grant application. Tyler?
Yeah, so the city of Bend for a federal Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. And they are seeking a letter of support from the Bend MPO for that grant application. And just a little bit of background about this grant program. Safe Streets and Roads for All is a program that was created under the current Federal Surface Transportation Bill, the IIJA. Funding has been available for a lot of funding available for planning purposes. That's the funding source that we're utilizing to update the Bend Transportation Safety Action Plan. Deschutes County received a grant to update the Deschutes County Safety Action Plan, many other action plans around the state. There's also funding available for demonstration projects and for construction projects. The city of Bend is going to be seeking demonstration funding or funding for two projects. One is to upgrade its communication software for fire and ambulance dispatching purposes within, not only within Bend, but within the entire service, their entire service area. And then the second component would be to purchase equipment that would allow them to be able to transfuse blood on site at scenes, that type of thing, instead of having to wait until that, the impacted person arrives at the hospital. And those are the two main components of that. And they've identified how they would track the progress on this in terms of doing performance monitoring and measuring and being able to report back to the federal government on the status of how beneficial these changes are. Any questions?
Great. Well, thank you. Those both seem like very worthwhile programs. Unless there's any questions, would someone like to make a motion?
I move to authorize the policy board chair to sign the letter of support for the City of Bend Safe Streets and Roads for All fiscal year 2025 grant application.
Is there a second?
I can second the motion.
Thank you. A motion has been made by Counselor Riley and seconded by Mr. Lilac. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Mike, was that an aye?
Yes, aye, sorry.
Thank you. Was that an aye? Okay, just checking. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, item number 11 is other business. So here we have time to consider requests or issues that have come up. And one of these issues is one that I have asked Tyler to provide some input on. A couple of weeks ago, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago now, an individual was struck and killed in a parking lot in Bend in front of Ace Hardware on 3rd Street. And in reading the details of that crash, a number of things struck me. One of them is that since it occurs on a private parking lot, it will likely, to my understanding, not be included in the official state statistics for transportation fatalities. But the second one is the one that I wondered if this board might be willing to share some thoughts on, which is we don't really have an opportunity to review fatalities that occur in our transportation system. And in particular, looking for what kinds of policy implications there might be when a fatality does occur. So in this latest example, for instance, I think that there are implications for things like parking lot design, which the city is engaged in as part of our climate-friendly area requirements. But I don't want to miss the opportunity to think about this from a policy perspective and trying to incorporate what lessons, if there are any, into our policy discussions. Now, having said that, the idea of some kind of fatality review board is complicated because in some cases there may be crimes that have been committed or that are being investigated and the outcome of which we may not know for months or even years. But nevertheless, I wanted to see whether there was ideas or thoughts about this idea of it seems like we're missing an opportunity to review at the local level. What are the policy implications when a serious injury or a fatality occurs? So I just wanted to open that up and see if there's any other thoughts from board members or staff on this that maybe this organization might contribute to.
Is that a practice that happens in other places? I'm curious, or is there a system? I guess that's part of the question. The other question is there, you're saying there's no system for this now?
Not that I'm aware of.
Nothing that happens like by ODOT or I don't know who, there's nobody like the sheriffs or, I mean, I guess they're not gonna look at it from a transportation policy perspective or lessons learned perspective.
Well, I think, Ken, I mean, I think you'll probably be able to speak to this. I think some of it, there is something, it's not like there's no consequence. But would you want to share what ODOT does?
Absolutely, yeah. So we go through on the state system every 2 years through our All Roads Transportation Safety program, where we highlight either systemic or hotspot crash locations and review fatalities and serious injuries. And we've wrestled with this fatality review concept at ODOT off and on throughout the years. You know, we now have a program dedicated to pedestrian and bicycle fatalities called their vulnerable crash response, where we review fatalities as they occur and as we get the information. So it's on like a separate program that operates on a quicker timeline. Again, that's on the state system. I think the things that we've wrestled with, I can just share our experiences. Sometimes we don't have all of that information at the time of the crash, as you mentioned, you know, especially if it's a part of a crime or some kind of other thing, you know, that will go through the courts first. And that's why through our 2-year process, we do a more statewide examination of all of the crashes on the highway system. So sometimes we're operating with like limited information when we do them quicker, but we do through that program offer opportunities for ODOT regions to implement low-cost safety countermeasures if they're warranted or representative of the crash type that occurred, right? So this could be striping, signage, things like that. But that's essentially what we do on the ODOT side. Happy to answer any other questions on that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think, I mean, part of my worry about this is, and it's I think related to some of the crash data is we overlook a lot of crashes. I mean, for example, I hear about things sometimes through the grapevine because my wife works at the hospital. But in this case, one of her colleagues' kids was struck by a driver near their house. And the kid bounced off the front of the vehicle, and the driver, who happened to be a neighbor, you know, kind of leaned over and said, "Are you okay?" And then drove off. Well, an incident like that's it didn't get reported.
Kind of a different problem there.
It is, but
I'm not.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, you know, you can imagine certainly that the outcome would have been worse had the driver been traveling at a faster speed. And so these kinds of, I don't want to miss the opportunity to incorporate these kinds of incidents into our policy conversations when we're talking about what is the appropriate speed in a residential neighborhood, or, you know, is it something like parking lot design, or is it that, you know, it turns out taking transit is much safer than driving. And so if we're thinking about these kinds of trade-offs and investments, I would like to explore the opportunity of kind of incorporating or building that process into the kind of policy discussions that we have, because my worry is that we don't have a good safety dashboard locally. Portland is sort of barely functional. I think ODOT, I'm not holding you responsible, but they used to have, you know, even the fatality counter that tallies statewide fatalities has disappeared. And in some ways it feels like we're moving backwards. So we're, you know, are we covering our eyes, or are we going in with eyes wide open and saying, well, actually, this is important and we should have something more than an informal, tally or spreadsheet that is up to date, but not officially used. So anyway, I've been thinking about this idea of fatality reviews and would be interested in it if anybody has ideas or ways to kind of bring this back. And Tyler, I think you've spent some time thinking about this. Do you have anything that?
Yeah, I mean, as I've talked to Councilor Mendez about it a little bit. There are, to your question, this is done elsewhere, so I think my recommendation to Councilor Mendez was that we spend a little bit of time, we staff spend a little bit of time, just do some research as to what's happening elsewhere, what kind of, who's engaged in those efforts, what kind of data is collected, and then what are they doing with it, and if we can, try and not recreate anything here, but just grab, borrow from others, craft something that would make sense for us here. Is that something we could incorporate into our work program over the next year?
Well, would there be support or interest in pursuing that kind of idea of seeing what other jurisdictions are doing, or, thinking about ways that we might incorporate that? Is that something that?
Yeah.
I think we could dive, we're going to be kicking off the safety action plan update, hopefully in early August.
Great.
I mean, we could potentially incorporate that into that process as well. So.
Well, we are unfortunately over time already, but Tyler, would you like to bring us some of these staff update items?
I don't have to talk to any. If you have questions, I guess I would just say, do you have any questions about any of the items we have listed there?
Okay. Is there any recent update on the state package?
Yeah, I mean, they've had one or two hearings, additional hearings this week. Unfortunately, I think where it's headed, I looked this morning, there are now over 20 amendments listed to the bill, and it's
from Republicans or from
everybody.
From everybody.
And so the discussion all along through the listening sessions they had and stuff, they wanted to have a back to basics kind of approach to this, make sure that operation, preservation, maintenance, those kind of things were, being addressed. The bill has grown a lot more. There's a lot more stuff in it now. And with that extra stuff being considered or added, the Democratic coalition is starting to fray a little bit. So I know they have a hearing at 1:30 or 2 this afternoon again. So I think they'll have to make some pretty significant progress in the next couple of days if this bill is if it's gonna move forward this session.
Yeah, coming down to the wire. Sine die is 29th?
Yeah.
It's my birthday.
Oh,
It'd be
really?
nice if they delivered a transportation package for my birthday.
Yeah.
Similar to what's on the table, in my opinion.
Have you submitted that testimony? I think it's fair to ask.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. Okay, good.
We have at the city.
Okay, well, our next policy board meeting is July 18th, 2025 at noon. We have 2 potential topics listed on there. Tyler, do you want to mention anything about either one of them?
Well, I think we've gone through the process of reviewing the policy board bylaws, gotten to that point. We brought the TAC bylaws before this body last month as well. And so we have a little bit of just finishing work to do that, bring those to you for final review and adoption, hopefully. We have invited a guest from the Federal Highway Administration's Western Federal Lands Office to talk about the Federal Lands Access Program needs assessment document that was recently completed, and that lines out projects or prioritizes projects for flat funding over the next 5 years across the state of Oregon. We thought that'd be of interest to the group. That's it.
Okay, well, our last item is public comment. Is there anyone who would like to make a public comment? I don't see anyone online. Chuck Arnold.
Hey, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to thank the board for giving me the opportunity to serve in the budget committee. I've enjoyed following the MPO's work since for the last 20 years, and looking forward to serve again if there's a need, and glad you guys are all set with enough volunteers. So thank you very much, and keep on doing what you're doing. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Chuck, for your time and attention to these important issues in the community.
Yeah, Chuck, thanks to you so much. Yeah, your input is definitely appreciated and look forward to continued engagement. So thank you. All right, well, with that, we are adjourned.